This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Katherine Shen. In a 2022 survey from CT Humanities, only 26% of Connecticut residents have said they visited a museum in person in the last 2 years. Some 83% of those museum goers identified as white. There are many museums where we live figuring out how to open their doors to a broader public and to engage their local community more meaningfully. We've covered some of those efforts on this program, including over the course of the Yale Peabody Museum's 4-year renovation process. Last week, the museum reopened to the public, now 50% larger and with free admission. There are dynamite exhibitions, some familiar and many new. There are also new research facilities, and 8 classroom staffers hope will be used by schools in the area. Coming up, we'll hear from curators, educators, and students about their hopes for the new Peabody. And we want to hear from you too. Have you visited the new or old Peabody Museum? Give us a call, 888-720-9677. That's 888-720-WNPR. Or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. First, our producer, Katie Pellico, took a tour on the Peabody's second day open, including a sneak preview of the museum's 3rd floor, which is set to open later this month. Let's take a walk with her now.
When you enter the new Yale Peabody Museum, look up. There's a family of 4 pteranodon fossils hovering over the visitor's desk.
It's a bit of a surprise, we think, for our visitors. And one of my favorite features about this is that the adult female and the babies are far away from you when you're in the lobby, and you can look up and find them. And then you encounter them in another way in one of the galleries upstairs.
That's Kailen Rogers, Associate Director of Exhibitions at the museum. On the 2nd floor, sure enough, 3 pteranodon were waiting just through a window, including the 2 babies.
I like to think if one of them is positioned as if it's about to fly off. I'm trying to figure out if the other one is encouraging it or taunting it. Siblings sometimes do. So the jury's still out. Can't wait for visitor feedback.
There are lots of new additions beyond the pteranodon family, and there's a new approach to how many of these artifacts are framed and described. Right away in the Burke Hall of Dinosaurs, I ran into a sign describing the legacy of the museum's original founder, O.C. Marsh, as, quote, complicated and deeply troubling. Museum director David Skelly touched on his hopes to do more to talk about his legacy, the ethics of fossil collecting, and the renewed mission of the new Peabody more broadly.
Yeah, and we've talked about doing an exhibit on Marsh and trying to unpack that, because one sign, it's not really possible really to get into it and understand people in their context and really what all that means and how we should react to it. And something that I think Kailen and others around the museum have been helping us do, which very much needs to happen, is recognize that we live in a world now where it isn't plausible to present our understanding of the world from a single perspective or lens, that we have to not just acknowledge but prioritize and give a voice to other perspectives, other ways of interpreting this material.
Kailen looked ahead to what the Peabody could be, starting with inclusivity.
With the new Peabody, I'm excited by a number of things. I'm excited about the types and layers of stories that we're telling, who our storytellers are. Now that we are wrapping our heads around getting all of the objects and labels installed, I'm excited to look forward to programming and other activities that we can bring into these spaces and really to connect with people. I'm also excited now that we have reopened as a free museum, thanks to the work of Dave and his partners on that. This is now more of a place that people can drop in and spend some time. Maybe you're hanging out in the central gallery in the comfy chairs. Maybe you're here to say hello to your favorite object. Maybe you're stopping by with your coworker on your coffee break. So leaning into those different types of ways that people are going to interact with the space is something I'm really looking forward to seeing.
Museum director David Skelly also touched on why including art, for example, the installation from New Haven-based artist Mohammed Hafez, is an important part of this expanded lens.
Art is also a reaction to the objects, the collections, and what they mean. All of those give a way for people visiting here to think about what they're seeing from their own perspectives. Not that they need our permission, but it's like an encouragement to do that. I curated only one gallery here. It's called the Living Lab, and it's got a bunch of hands-on displays, and it has objects from all over the museum, all 10 divisions. And in there, we're really foregrounding that and saying, you come in and you interpret this stuff. What do you think? We need to be doing that as a society much more broadly. As a scientist, I can tell you that the idea that scientists exist over here in some kind of priesthood has gotten us into trouble as a society, because we just become a faction rather than sharing with everyone that everybody can have a scientific perspective, or whatever perspective you have. And if science is worth something, we should be willing to have these fundamental conversations with you about why we reach scientific conclusions, what they mean, and have that up against other sorts of perspectives.
I watched Kailen and David witness visitors taking in Hafez's artwork for the first time since the museum had opened. Shayla Zachary and her son Zakai had fun finding different items in the 10-foot sculpture during their first visit to the Peabody.
Wow. So colorful.
A chair.
There is a chair to sit.
So we've been waiting to see this for a long time.
It actually was the first time I've been here since we've been open to the public. And so it is, I don't actually really have the words for it. This is our signature community collaboration, and our gallery curator for the Babylonian section was a wonderful partner in developing this, and she made space for this work in the gallery and understood its importance and its necessity. But one thing that I love is watching them just be drawn to this piece and interact with it in a way that is different from how they interact with the rest of the space.
You can just see that happen.
Yeah, and
which is exactly what we hoped.
Exactly, and the power of art to communicate on this level that we're not able to hit in other ways.
A fish.
You see a fish? Where is the fish? I don't see a fish. I see people. I see water. And if I see water, there must be a fish, right?
Fish.
Oh, maybe you'll find one.
David and Kailen were quick to point out two well-loved pit stops from the old Peabody that are still on display, down in the first floor in the Burke Hall of Dinosaurs.
So we're now standing underneath the Brontosaurus's tail, which in the old Peabody you couldn't walk under because it was on the ground. So this is something I find endlessly cool. In front of us we have a table that has a print of our Age of Reptiles mural by Rudolf Zalander, which is in front of us. That is 110 feet long by 17 feet high. And on the table in front of us, we have a number of the animals that are featured in the mural in 3D print. But it also has these dinosaur names in Braille. And then we're going to be adding audio descriptions that will tell people more about this.
The Brontosaurus fossil was arduously and reinstalled with 27 additional vertebrae. You can see a time-lapse of that removal process on the Peabody's social media accounts, which we will post to our show page. It's considered the first Brontosaurus ever discovered, along with the Triceratops and Stegosaurus in the same hall. Each have been redisplayed according to the university's latest research.
I've been coming here since I was a kid, and you're standing right in front of my favorite, which is one of the famous ones, Stegosaurus. When I was a kid, the idea that you would have these giant plates on your back and then these big spikes on your tail seemed pretty cool to me. And it got even cooler because when they were just called tail spikes when I was a kid. Now they're called thagomizers. And that's the official scientific name for that came from a Gary Larson cartoon, a Far Side cartoon, where a cave person, not that cave people coexisted with dinosaurs, but a cave person is saying that these are called thagomizers. They're named after dearly departed Thag, who was on the receiving end of one of them. And somebody thought that was a funny cartoon, and then they published a scientific paper where they officially called it Thagomizer. We have the cartoon on the rail there.
Before getting a preview of the third floor, I ran into one visitor named Vinny Wilhelm. He was here with his family all the way from California and remembered the old Peabody fondly.
I love that they kept the old mural in the dinosaur hall. I used to stare at that thing for hours when I was a kid. But the there's so much more information on the placards, and it's just they have more extensive holdings, I think, and they got really nice areas to hang out. They have that seating area underneath the giant mosasaur and sea turtle skeletons, which is great for if you have little kids. So it seems like they just did a wonderful job of preserving all the old stuff, but then also making it a little more user-friendly.
And joining me now to discuss the new Yale Peabody Museum is Chris Norris, who's the Director of Public Programs at the museum. Thank you so much, Chris, for being with us this morning.
Thank you for inviting me.
Well, it's always nice to start a morning with all the hustle and bustle that we're hearing, and it just sounds like there's so much excitement with the museum reopening. And I know this moment was 4 years in the making for you, so I cannot imagine the anticipation. So I want to start with, how do you feel seeing and hearing the museum in use and at least part of the way full?
It's beyond fantastic. We've been closed for 4 years, and so one of the things that we've missed out on is the sound of people in the galleries, particularly the sound of children in the galleries. We've had it to ourselves for 4 years, but it's been empty and a little sterile as we filled it up. You can feel the museum coming to life right now, and that's I can't convey how fantastic that is.
Well, I bet hearing the sounds, especially with kids, being super excited being there. I mean, I want to go ASAP. So, and we also heard from Museum Director David Skelly and Associate Director of Exhibitions Kailen Rogers through Katie Pellico's walkthrough. Can you talk about what's your response to what they've said, especially about their vision for the new Peabody?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a combined vision for all of us. We went into this project feeling like there was a different way for the museum to do things. For the longest time, I think we had adopted the approach that we were somehow keepers of knowledge. Dave referred to it as a priesthood. There's a little bit of that sometimes with museums where, as curators, we feel like it's our role to tell people what's important about these objects that we're displaying, and that really ours are the only voices that they should be hearing in the galleries. And I think from the earliest days of this project, what we recognized is that specimens and objects have a multiplicity of different values for different people. Those values can be scientific, and we're a science museum, and mostly the stories that you hear will be science, but they can also be aesthetic and cultural. They can be deeply personal in some cases. And that if we provided space and opportunity for people to bring some of those stories and some of those perspectives into the galleries, the overall experience for all of our visitors would be a richer one.
Well, and then you also mentioned that it's a group vision, and with the process of opening up that knowledge and opening up that priesthood, so to speak, how would you describe your own version for the new Peabody?
I think the best way to describe it is that people should come here and that they should feel at home, that they shouldn't necessarily walk in the door and feel like we have done them a favor by admitting them to this space. We want them to feel that it's their space as much as it's ours, and that they should be able to look around them and say, okay, yep, I belong here. This is my place, and I feel comfortable with myself and my family visiting.
Well, I think you certainly hear that comfortableness, I think, from the visitors that we heard earlier during the walkthrough. And also want to talk about another big change here is free admission. It's a huge part of this, and this is free admission in perpetuity. Can you explain how the museum was able to make that happen?
Through fundraising. So basically, we have some extraordinarily generous friends at the Peabody who enabled us not just to do the bricks and mortar work of rebuilding the museum and filling it with these fabulous displays, but also raising enough money that we were able to offset the ticket sales that we previously needed to keep the lights on and keep the museum open. So we're now set up as a result of that fundraising in perpetuity to offer people free access. And I think that's a huge it's one huge barrier that we've removed in terms of access. I would say it's an enormous first step, but it's not the only step. So we're going to have to continue working, getting out into the community and building links. And I think you're going to hear a little bit about that from my colleagues later on.
Definitely, we will be talking about the importance of that accessibility, and very much related to that. I want to ask you about curatorial voice. Can you talk about that? What does that mean, and how is it being reimagined right now?
I would say that what we're trying to do is to think carefully about the stories that we want to tell in the galleries. So, as I said, we're a science museum. We have access to a fantastic body of scientific knowledge, both within the museum in terms of its curators and also across campus, across Yale. But we also have students who are engaged in research, who are doing fascinating, often cutting edge work that we want to highlight and bring into the space. We have people that are from outside of the museum that work on our collections. And we also have people that look at our collections academically, but in a different way. So, for example, one of the labels that you'll find in our dinosaur galleries is from a child psychologist who basically addresses the issue of why it is that kids find dinosaurs fascinating. And that is something that I think we all know, but we don't necessarily have an academic perspective on why it is. And so there's all of those things, plus, as I said, all of the different values that attach to the objects beyond just the purely scientific. And so it's making label space available for that. It's having cases that are structured so that we can hand them over to somebody for a period of time for them to curate the contents of that case. Having drawers in some cases, which enable us to have small exhibitions that are curated by somebody else, and also having digital resources that enable us to bring other voices into the gallery. So there are a multiplicity of different ways in which we can diversify the curatorial voice.
Well, and then now I'm curious, did you get an unscientific answer as to why kids love dinosaurs? I mean, I love dinosaurs, and now I'm thinking, why do I love them? It's because they're cool.
Well, because the simple answer is they're monsters, and everybody likes monsters and is impressed by monsters. But monsters are also kind of scary. And dinosaurs are safe because they're not here anymore, other than the very unscary birds that are still alive. So dinosaurs lets you have all of the fun of seeing a real monster, but also the comfort of knowing that it's not going to turn up at your house and eat you.
Oh, that's a good point. Although if a big bird came at me, I probably will be running. So, and talking about the Peabody reimagining curatorial voice, I want to talk also about the museum's role in the tradition of fossil collecting, for example. So how do you go about talking about the elephant fossil in the room?
Well, what you do is you're honest about it. It's a complicated story. It's a story that David Skelly referred to earlier on as something that we've broached in one label so far, actually two labels. We have a label that talks about O.C. Marsh, our founder, and his complex legacy, the fact that he was a brilliant scientist, that he collected these dinosaur fossils that are icons of evolution and indeed popular icons, things like Triceratops, Brontosaurus, Stegosaurus. But he was also collecting in the American West at a time of great conflict between the expanding United States and the indigenous nations that occupied the land there. He was going onto their land to collect fossils. He was not asking their permission, not seeking their permission, and he was doing it in the context of other invasions that sought to take other resources from them, be they mineral resources or be they land for farming. So he's part and parcel of that, and it's very difficult to separate those things. To get into it in more detail, we will probably need a whole exhibition on Marsh in its own right.
Right.
That's something that we're considering right now. But what the other label shows you when you get into Gallery 104 is how we do it today. And how we do it today is light years away from Marsh's approach. We never go anywhere now without seeking permission, be it from the landowners, be it from federal authorities. There is always permission, there is always consent, and there is often and frequently involvement of people, and this is particularly true when we work outside of the United States, involvement of people from the host country, and an expectation that the things that we discover don't necessarily leave that country and come back to the Peabody, that they actually stay within museums in the country where they originate. This is very, very different from how museums used to operate in the past. But it's something that now, I think, as a discipline is more or less universal. We have a ways to go, but we have come an enormously long way from where we used to be.
Well, and that's a conversation that we have had and will certainly continue to have. You've been listening to Chris Norris, who'll be staying with us, and we'll hear from two more of his colleagues after a quick break. And listeners, we want to hear from you too. Let us know if you visited the new or old Peabody Museum. Give us a call, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Kailen Rogers. This hour, we're discussing the Yale Peabody Museum's new approach to collections and community building. And joining us now to discuss is Lindsay Pierce. She's the digital content assistant at the museum. Lindsay, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hi, Kat. Happy to be here.
And also still with us is Chris Norris, who's the director of public programs at the museum. And listeners, let us know if you've checked out the museum already or not. You can join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So, Lindsay, I imagine it's been a really busy week for you. What has it been like now that the museum is open?
It's been a whirlwind. I was lucky enough to be on the floor throughout all of Tuesday, our opening day, taking pictures for socials. And, I had other job things I had to do, but I found myself really wanting to just walk around and soak it all in. Everyone was so excited. I got to meet a bunch of people. I got to tell people extra tidbits, about something they were looking at or direct them to another case that I thought would be fun. And it was truly so rewarding to see everyone really enjoy all the work we put into this.
And having basically seen, plans turn into reality, what does the new Peabody mean to you, Lindsay?
Ooh, yeah. I said something last week talking to somebody that I feel like the museum itself is almost this like hall of stories. So I was a Yale undergrad and studied the science of narrative and storytelling. And storytelling has always been what I'm most interested in. And the new Peabody to me is like a brand new book. With, some of our pages are filled in. We have labels, we have researchers that have put all of this work into giving you all this information, but it's really just the beginning of where we can go with telling the stories of these objects, telling the stories of cultures and history and connections. And so what the new Peabody means to me is a new opportunity for storytelling.
Well, I'm really glad that we're able to be here and crack that spine of the new book, Lindsay, the new Peabody book, which to the dismay of many people, I don't usually crack books, but anyway, what are your hopes for the new Peabody? Do you have goals for community engagement, for example?
Yeah, I have lots of fun stuff I want to do. Some of my favorite things that I did in my time at Yale and in my time as an undergrad were collaborations with groups that stretched from, a Yale undergrad group that would then combine with a local New Haven group, and we would, be able to have this sense of community together. Goals that I have myself. The Yale Cultural Centers do so much incredible work with the New Haven community, and I really want to see the Peabody kind of tap into that energy and that synergy that they've created. also, people, yes, we're on the radio. People have thrown around the idea of a Peabody podcast. Someone had the idea of calling it the Peapod, which I
Oh my
kind of
God.
love and
I
kind of
love
hate
that.
on the side.
That's
So
beautiful.
there's I just think so much opportunity for collaboration and collaborative storytelling specifically. I'm really excited about.
And Chris, we'll love your response to Lindsay here. Talk about this new book with us. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not a spine cracker either when it comes to books. Maybe that's my response. No, it is a place full of stories, and finding new ways to tell the stories is a really, really exciting challenge for us. I'll give you one example of a different way in which we're telling a story. So we've had an opportunity in the museum to display a collection of South American fossils for the first time. They come from Argentina. They are spectacular. They have some accompanying artwork from Rudolf Zallinger, who's the artist that painted the Age of Reptiles and Age of Mammals murals. The artwork we've never had on display before. So the whole thing is a great opportunity to show people stuff that they haven't seen. One of the interesting things about these South American fossils is they're fantastically important. And they were fantastically important in the development of paleontology as a science. But for the longest time in the early history of paleontology, they weren't widely known outside of South America because people published in Spanish. There was a Spanish speaking community of paleontologists in South America that was doing fantastic work. And so, when you look at people like O.C. Marsh, they tend to dominate the story that the Peabodys told in the past, the North American paleontology story. We wanted to tell a little bit of the South American paleontology story, but we wanted to tell it in the language in which the work was originally done and described. And so that particular case, all of the labels are in Spanish. They were written by a colleague of mine, Mariana Di Giacomo, who is from Uruguay. She is our conservator, but she also trained as a paleontologist. People will go to that and they will say, well, where is the English translation of these labels? And it's there. There's a QR code. You can scan it. You can get it on your phone. And they may say, well, why do I have to scan a QR code to get access to these labels? And to be honest, that's because what most people who visit the museums who are not fluent in the native language of the museum have to do to get access to the information. So we're making you go through a step that, maybe as an English speaker in a museum where all of the labels are in English, you wouldn't be familiar with doing, or you wouldn't be familiar with having that experience. We think it's important because 52% of the households in New Haven now are households where Spanish is the primary language. And so for a lot of our visitors, when you want them to, feel like there's something to make them feel a little bit at home, a case that's for them, that's written in Spanish, that's where the information is primarily delivered in Spanish and where it's talking about research that was done by a community that was Spanish speaking, seems to be a good way to make the point that we're a museum for everyone.
Mm. And Lindsay, I want to ask you a similar question. Chris just shared the importance and how much he loved having the chance to sort of present the South American artifacts. What artifact or item do you think best represents the new Peabody Museum for you?
The one I always go back to is the quipu, which is this Inca record keeping. A document isn't quite the word because it's a textile and it's a series of pieces of fabric tied in knots, and the knots in different string lengths are how the information is communicated. But where we put it on the second floor is at this transition point between our Egypt and Mesopotamian gallery and our Mesoamerican and Andean gallery. And the kind of last case to its left in the Egypt and Mesopotamian gallery is the origins of writing in both Egypt and Mesopotamia. So hieroglyphs and cuneiform in the case of ancient Mesopotamia. And then we kind of have the quipu as this other example of how humans were thinking about communicating and record keeping, and it transitions us into a case in the Mesoamerican and Andean gallery that's about ancient Mayan writing. So it's this almost like not quite the story of stories, but like the story of how we started keeping our records, of how we started trying to think about information we want to last beyond our memories, beyond one individual person's thoughts. So it's a really cool kind of transition and path for me that I pay attention to whenever I'm walking through that section as well.
And what is it about it that interests you so much? Because like as you're describing, I can see myself like I personally love seeing historical records of like grocery lists because like it's just kind of fun to see what people like to buy back in the day, and then you're like, wow, we actually have a lot more in common than I thought. What is it about this that you love, Lindsay?
I mean, I come to the Peabody as a writer. I've been writing since I was a kid, figuring out what stories I wanted to tell and how I wanted to tell them. And it's so fascinating to me to have that evidence of the beginning of that process, as humans generally. And I think also what makes it really cool to me is, these different forms of writing were developing in 4 different places in, very different times. But everyone was driven to make a record of what they were doing, to make a record of the people around them and of the interactions they were having. And that's, an instinct I can relate to.
Right.
So it's
Right.
it's fun to think about that.
Definitely. I think it's really fun to realize that we all love making lists, no matter where you're from and what timing, what era you're in. You've been listening to Lindsay Pierce. Thank you so much for your time, and please keep us posted on the Peapod. And Chris will be staying with us, and we'll continue this conversation with the museum's director of education and a doctoral student after a quick break. Let us know if you've visited a new or old Peabody Museum. Join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or leave us a comment on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. This is Where We Live from Connecticut Public Radio. I'm Kailen Rogers. Joining us now to help dig into some of the new uses for the Yale Peabody Museum just after its long-anticipated reopening is Andrea Motto, who's a director of education at the museum. Andrea, thank you so much for being on Where We Live today.
Hi, Kat. Thanks for having me.
And also with us is Kelsey Jenkins, who's a paleontology doctoral student at Yale University. Kelsey, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And we also have Chris Norris, who's the director of public programs at the museum. And just a quick reminder for our listeners that you can also join the conversation, 888-720-9677, or find us on Facebook and Twitter at Where We Live. So Andrea, we'll love to hear your reaction to seeing the museum completely packed with classes and students this last week. What was going through your mind?
Oh, you can't see my face, but I'm smiling right now. This week was so much fun. The very first visitors in the museum were first graders from Family Academy of Multilingual Exploration and sixth graders from Augusta Troop School, and they were so fantastic. It feels really good to have kids in the galleries again. And this weekend was really wonderful because it was the first time our team of youth employees were back working in the galleries. Museums can be kind of intimidating places. So seeing New Haven teens teaching museum visitors is really amazing. It's crucial that young visitors see teachers who are from similar backgrounds and talk in similar ways and help to make this place feel like it really is for all of us.
Well, I really love that because we've had conversations on the show about, there is a sense of, I think, stoicism of the museum. There's an authority to it, and you have to like talk in a whisper. Okay, so can you describe about how the new Peabody is really uniquely suited for those K through 12 class trips?
The really fun thing about the Peabody Museum is that real science is happening here. It's not just representations of science, it's the real stuff. And so working with scientists like Kelsey and our collections managers give students a chance to touch real artifacts, to see things that are millions of years old. And so that gives us a really unique opportunity to give students access to actual current hands-on living science.
And Kelsey, speaking of science, can you give us a sense of how you're utilizing the museum in your own research?
Yes, I mean, museums only show about a couple, like maybe 1% of what they have in their collections on display. Behind the scenes, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of specimens of everything from teeny tiny bugs to fossils to cultural artifacts. And so having this sort of resource, it's like a library that you can check out, but it's how you collect your data. And so having a museum like this that is not only educational, but research inclined as well, is just crucial to researchers like myself. I think everyone in my department, as well as neighboring departments, probably rely on the Peabody in some way.
And Andrea, with what Kelsey said, can you talk about how is this a good example of how the museum might be a source of inspiration for other students?
Yeah, I mean, that's what museums are really all about, is sparking interest and inspiring new ideas. And so I think giving students access to real science that's happening allows them to see different future possibilities, to be able to see themselves doing science or being involved in science or anthropology or cultural studies. Exposure to real people and their careers can be really important for students.
Definitely makes it look really cool. Kelsey, you're working as a research scientist now. What are your hopes, or what would you like to see in the future in terms of the resource or the source of inspiration for students?
I just want the Peabody to keep doing what it's doing and updating itself over the years to incorporate new science. Just the other day, we were walking through the galleries as the museum opened, and I was talking to one of our Peabody staff, Susan Butts, and she's like, okay, well, what did we have wrong here already? What can we update? And so knowing that the Peabody has a really open mind to continually update and improve and give visitors the most up-to-date experience, I think is really, really cool, and not something that you see at a lot of museums. A lot of places just don't have the time or the energy or the resources to do that kind of thing.
Definitely. And Chris, can you touch on how Kelsey has also contributed to some of the collections that visitors will see?
Yeah, Kels is a remarkable person in terms of her ability to storytell around science. She has brought in research that she has mentored undergraduates on. So there's a small exhibition in there that's about procolophonids, which are something that I guarantee nobody will have heard of, but they're a fascinating group of very, very early things that are. And they are cute. They are cute. All right. I missed out the fact they're very, very cute.
We love cute things.
This is a very cute thing. But being able to bring in research like that's sort of ongoing is super important for us. I think one of the things that I just wanted to touch on, that coming out of the discussion that we're having now, is that we don't know everything in the museum. There are all sorts of questions that people might have about particularly fossils, but in fact all sorts of different types of animals, plants, and other objects that no one can really answer now because they don't have the evidence, or because they haven't found the approach that will provide an answer to it. What we're doing in educating people is we're showing them that, particularly for young people, there are really important unanswered questions out there. And they could get to do those questions. They could get to do the work that answers those questions. And if you're thinking about a career in science, if you're thinking about a career in paleontology, don't get the impression, and we do not give the impression, that we know everything that there is to know about fossils and there's nothing left to learn. There is so much left to learn. And I think that the way that we go about education is all about opening people to the opportunities that they could come in and be the person that discovers something or that answers a question that right now I couldn't answer.
Right, and there is definitely nothing better than inspiring curiosity, although you might have just sent me into an existential crisis of realizing that I may not be able to learn everything that I want to know in the museum. But we're going to try by going to the museum many, many times. And of course, I can't leave this conversation without asking both Andrea and Kelsey. I want to ask you about your favorite item that really shows off the museum's renewed mission. Let's start with Andrea.
Oh, so I'm going to give you a bit of a spoiler because it's something on the third floor that isn't actually complete yet.
Okay, it could be a tease. It could be a tease.
In the Dynamic Nature Gallery, there will be this sort of cornucopia of living things, deer next to mice, next to butterflies, next to plants. It just emphasizes that our planet has this really incredible diversity of life. And all of that diversity happens as life adapts and changes over time. And that's a theme that we see throughout all of the galleries, but it's really going to be beautifully displayed in this this big case in the middle of the room that I hope will be as amazing as I picture it in my head.
I'm sure it will be. And Kelsey, what's your favorite item?
It's kind of hard to pinpoint. I'm a huge fan of natural history museums in general and science museums. And so when I travel, I try to check out the local science museum anywhere I go. And so now I just want to try to find what's unique about a museum. I think a lot of museums, especially museums of our size, tend to have a large dinosaur, which is cool, but I can kind of see that anywhere I go. And so I want to find what's different about a museum. And I think in the Peabody, we have an excellent exhibit on oreodonts, which are these weird little mammals that Chris is a big fan of. He could tell you more about them. But we also have, models that bring to life animals for the first time. Like we have animals that are over 500 million years old from an area called the Burgess Shale. And they're weird, enigmatic, crazy things. And we have models that show you what they look like. So I think these are things that you're not going to find anywhere else. And they make the Peabody really special.
I do like finding those lesser known things, but I can never remember their names. So I'm going to have to really work on that. And Andrea, a bit of maybe another tease for us. Can you talk about what are your hopes for community engagement? Because I know that plays a really big role in this conversation that we're having.
Yeah, I see a lot of opportunity to reach audiences who have never been here before or didn't think this place was for them because it was too expensive or confusing or unwelcoming. I see opportunities to build new partnerships with really incredible community organizations across New Haven and learn from them about how to build relationships with our neighbors. And I see opportunities to become part of this larger ecosystem of learning that spans generations and backgrounds across the whole city. And our exhibits are what set those opportunities in motion, and the relationships with people and organizations that we can build over time will really create something wonderful.
And can you give us an idea of how neighbors or local organizations can reach out to you with ideas or potential partnerships?
Yeah, absolutely. Our education department is working regularly to do community outreach. We're trying to show up at festivals and events, and we're happy to come to community events that are happening. We want to learn from organizations that provide education in all sorts of ways and to all sorts of audiences. So reaching out to me or our peabody.education@yale.edu team, we're happy to talk about ways to collaborate.
And Chris, what about you? What are your hopes for community engagement or ideas for any future community collaborations?
I think we've built a museum now that's very flexible in terms of being able to accommodate different types of use. So it has more space than the old Peabody. It has more open space for programming than the Peabody did. It has classrooms. It has galleries where it's relatively easy to insert new material, change labels, put in small exhibitions. So we've built the most flexible museum that we could have. I think what we want to do is to get the message to as many of our community partners as we can that there are there are opportunities here that we're eager to work with people. We're eager to learn from people, as Andrea was saying, and that we have the potential to develop really, really valuable and affirming collaborations around the use of the space that we have at the museum. As you said, it's not just for us. It's for all of the people around New Haven and the surrounding communities who have loved this place for years. We've built a museum that they can now engage with more deeply, and we'd love to see that happen.
And I do want to get some final thoughts from you, Chris. But before I do that, I want to just go back a little bit. Andrea did give us a preview of the third floor a little bit, and I thought you might help us do a little bit more teasing about the cornucopia of life and what can we expect there.
So so we have the cornucopia of life. That's part of a gallery called Dynamic Nature, which looks at the processes of evolution that generate the diversity that you see in cases like the cornucopia. We have another representation of diversity, which is the diorama halls. People may remember the dioramas from previous visits to the Peabody. What we've been able to do as part of the renovation is to make a number of upgrades to them, and in particular to their lighting, so that the dioramas now have a vibrancy and a depth and a life to them that they never had before. And I think people will be blown away to see them in their new form.
Well, just really
we have the living lab.
Oh,
sorry.
No, go for it.
We also have the Living Lab, which David Skelly mentioned, which is a place where people can actually encounter objects and form their own judgments and their own ideas around what they're seeing and encountering.
Well, we're very excited to get the opportunity to form our own judgment, and just wanted to really quickly share that our producer, Katie, is very relieved to hear that her favorite corner of the museum is still, in fact, intact. So thank you so much for that, Chris. And we've got about a minute left, but any final thoughts that you would like to leave our listeners with?
I would say come to the Peabody, experience what we have on offer, but know that we're continually changing, we're continually updating, and when you come back, you will see new things.
Thank you very much for sharing all of that with us. You've been listening to Chris Norris and Andrea Motto, who's the Director of Public Programs and the Director of Education at the Yale Peabody Museum. Thank you both for being with us today.
Thank you.
And you were also listening to Kelsey Jenkins, who's a paleontology doctoral student at Yale University. Thank you so much, Kelsey, for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
I'm Katherine Shen. Today's show is produced by Katie Pellico. Our technical producer is Kat Pastor. Download Where We Live anytime on your favorite podcast app. And thank you so much for listening.